Om Namah Shivaya. Good morning, welcome back to inthekhud. In this video I'm going to document how you can take a cycles render, which is on an average taking 35 seconds to render, to an EVEE render, which is more or less acceptable with a little bit of color correction in the post, using irradiance, volume and reflection cube maps. One more good example is this one. This frame taking 35 seconds to render in cycles, how can we take it to here rendered in EVEE with the bottle looking more or less the same here with the reflections? And to be honest, I would say that I would prefer this over this one. That is such a rookie mistake to make that I made. I was trying to render everything in cycles, which is not needed. And this is something that I've thought about earlier as well, that EVEE renders are good, they're pretty good, and there are ways that you can manipulate, especially with indirect lighting and a little bit of shadow work. The thing that is important to note here is just by doing that little tweak, that little bit of effort is going to reduce your render times by 7 times, and that is huge. Something that's taking 35 seconds to render can be rendered in 5 seconds. So this is the entire coconut tree beach scene here, and I'm gonna just go into my rendered view once, and we're currently in cycles. So this is how this scene looks, okay? And I'm gonna go back to solid view. This is something you do just to load the textures in correctly. I'm gonna press F12 to render, and we're gonna see how much time this is taking to render in cycles at 64 samples. Samples. 43. Okay, it's weird. Every single time that I render this scene, it takes less and lesser time to do it. Is it because there's some memory stored in it? I don't know. Anyway, it's taking 25 seconds to render this in cycles. So I'm gonna go to slot. It's already a slot. I'm gonna go to slot 3 now, and I'm gonna switch to EVEE. And just right off the bat, with switching to EVEE, there are ambient occlusion, bloom and screen space reflections on. So just that, nothing else. Oh, I think I have an irradiance volume in here. Let me remove that. Let me hide this for a minute, and now let's render it. Yeah, you don't see any generation happening. It's just there you go. So interesting. This took 12 seconds, and if I was to compare this with this, of course these look a lot more realistic because it's in cycles. And here the main thing I feel is a bit weird is the color of the trees. And I did not spend a lot of time making this project, so it just feels a bit weird, the shadows and everything, and there are trees hanging out of nowhere. But okay, we're trying to look at this thing here. The ocean looks very different. Again, that's something that can be fixed in Premiere via color correction. The color is not something that I'm very concerned about. I'm trying to look at what is majorly different from here to here. The contrast and everything I can fix. The green color of the trees I can fix. But I'm not sure why it's taking 1286 to render. It shouldn't take so long. But anyway, that was this scene. I'm gonna switch to the other scene now, because this really blew my mind up. Okay, now we're gonna stay in cycles first, and with default settings, just go to render view once, see what we're working with. Go to solid again. I'm gonna render this. So this frame rendering in cycles is taking at 64 frames, 64 samples. It's taking how long? It's taking 20 seconds and 23 seconds. You to focus on is the bottle here, because that's something that will be completely screwed in EVEE. That's out of experience. So slot 3 and slot 4 is where I'm gonna come to EVEE, and without anything, I think over here as well I have a cube map, which I'm gonna hide for the moment. Oh, let me delete it. I don't know how it works. Delete lighting cache and then delete this. So EVEE right off the bat with ambient occlusion, and let's keep bloom on, and screen space reflections. No indirect lighting as of now. Shadows is also at default. So if I hit render in EVEE, what was that? 23 seconds. Let's see how long this takes. This took 9 seconds. So there's really no 7% or difference or anything, but the main thing that I want to focus on here is, again, the colors, the contrast is something I can fix in post. that's not a problem. The important thing is the bottle, right? If you look at the bottle, this looks very blown out and stuff, and doesn't look very realistic as compared to here. It looks a lot more realistic. So how can we go from here to here in EVEE? That's what we're going to try and do now. So let me stay in my rendered view because this is EVEE, it's like material preview, no problem as such. And the first thing you want to do is, every time there is like a glass kind of thing, it's plastic, but plastic or glass, any kind of transparent thing is there, you want to make sure that your reflections are fixed, because that's what is a bigger problem with EVEE. You won't get like good reflections on this particular part, like it's a bit blown out and it's not very clear. So I'm going to come in here, Shift S, cursor is selected, and here I'm going to say Shift A, light probe, and you can say reflection cube map, reflection plane, irradiance volume. Now more or less all these three are doing the same thing. Irradiance volume is for like a bigger scene, when you want like an entire landscape to be filled with natural reflections. But I'm going to go with cube map here because this seems to work for like individual elements in your scene. So for this bottle, for example, I'm going to scale it such that it's like completely in here, and I'm going to come into my render properties, and indirect lighting, I'm going to say bake cube map only. Okay, and that's done. So now already you see that from what you were seeing earlier, this is a lot better. So I'm going to go to F12 now. I haven't changed the slot, so we can't really see the difference. Slot 4 was EVEE earlier, now we went to slot 3 again. So from here, like this kind of a blown out stuff, we've come to here just by using that cube map, which if I was to somehow compare it to the EVEE render, which is gone at the moment because we overrode the slot, to the cycles render, it is pretty similar, and more than similar, is like it's believable. This here doesn't look right. It feels like what is happening here inside the bottle. And every time you have like a brand that you're working for, the main focus of the viewer is not on like the landscape or these weird stones that I have scattered, like a failed scatter on geonodes. Their focus will be on the bottle, so the bottle should look as realistic as possible. That's one thing. So yeah, that's what this does. And the second thing that I want to do is, for making the whole thing a little more realistic, what we can do is we can add a Shift A light probe, irradiance volume, and we're gonna scale it up to fit the whole thing. Okay, I'm gonna come here and scale it on the X to fill the whole, like the inner box should fill the whole scene. Okay, and we're gonna stay at a lower resolution because it's a huge scene, so it is gonna take some time to blend. We're gonna stay at 444 for the moment. I'm coming to render properties again, and where is it? Render properties, we're going to come to indirect lighting, and this time I'm going to say bake indirect lighting, and this may take a little bit of time, but our resolution is not too much. What is all this? So yeah, now your reflections should be a lot more natural, the way it is interacting with the environment. So to F12 again. And okay, so from here, slot 4, we've gone to here. So you see that the exposure is fixed a little bit with that irradiance volume. Here everything is quite blown out with the way the sun is interacting with things, but within the radiance volume, everything seems a little more almost like composed nicely. One more thing that is worth experimenting with here is you can come into your render properties again and go into color management. Currently it's at standard. If you go to filmic and you say very high contrast, this will again take your renders a little closer to cycles with EVEE. Okay, I still haven't worked on the shadow part of it, but because this is a sunset scene, there won't be a lot of shadows anyway. Yeah, and you see right now it's taking 4 seconds and almost like 5 seconds. So this is what I was trying to say, is like if a cycles render is taking you 35 seconds to render on an average one frame, this kind of an EVEE render, which to me, to be honest, this looks better than the cycles render. So the other day that I was experimenting with this, I made a Photoshop file to compare my EVEE renders and cycle renders. One that you see on your left is your cycles render, okay, which is taking like 35 seconds or something. The one on the right is your EVEE render. And again, we're not trying to worry so much about the color of things, because color can be fixed in Premiere. We're trying to look at how different it is in terms of the render itself. Okay, these are a few more EVEE renders, I think, with and without irradiance volume or changing like the filmic mode. Okay, and this is what I was talking about. This is the cycles render that I did, and yes, you get these kind of like reflections on the trees, which make it look more realistic. But from here to here, if you showed me these two frames just by default, I would prefer the right frame, because it looks a lot more contrasty. Again, the contrast is something that we can fix. The only point that I want to drive home here in this whole video is the fact that for the work that I'm doing right now, at least, there is absolutely no need to stick to cycles all the time, because EVEE is good enough. And it's not just good enough in your final render, the way it looks, with a little bit of tweaks with the radiance volume and cube maps and stuff, but it's extremely efficient when it comes to your render times. If I just thought about this little thing here, I wouldn't have gone the iRender route that day, where I spent $100. And it's okay. I'm very glad that I did that, because now I know how to use iRender, which is an absolutely necessary tool in case where I'm completely out of choice in an emergency. I have to render something now, it's taking ages for me to render it on my system. I can go there, recharge like $50 and get that render done. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I want to document in this session. Okay, thanks so much for being in the khud. I will catch you tomorrow. Peace.